Hello, thank you for stopping by. My name is Becky and this is Bex Reads, and today I am doing somewhat of a weekly wrap-up. I'm going to talk about the books that I have read since July 1st to July 20th, I guess. The first book that I read this month was Beautiful Villain by Rebecca Kinney. This was an audio arc that I got through NetGalley. I actually got the ebook and the audiobook, and I was so glad that they gave me the audiobook because I am having a hell of a time reading this summer. Like, I'm just not getting through books. So this helped tremendously. So I wanted to read this because I have enjoyed Rebecca Kinney's books in the past, and this is her first traditionally published book. It does release, I think it's already maybe been released. This is a new adult paranormal romance. It is a mashup of The Great Gatsby with vampires. I would more or less classify this as hornier Twilight. So if you were somebody who enjoyed Twilight back in the day, but you wanted it to be a little bit spicier, I think you would really enjoy this story. So in this, we're following this girl. I think her name is Daisy, okay? I didn't write down notes before I sat down to film this video, so I'm just going off of memory. I think her name is Daisy. And she gets invited to this party one day, to this very rich, opulent mansion, and I think it's her cousin who actually goes missing. And so she goes about her time, and then she gets invited back, and she's like, I'm gonna find out what happened to my cousin. She ends up finding her cousin. And she also discovers that the host of this party is her once childhood best friend named Jay Gatsby. And there's something different about him. He is not the scrawny little boy that she remembers and that she had grown fond of. He's this very beautiful, very charming man. And she starts to spend more time with him. She starts to see the people he surrounds himself with, and she discovers that he is a vampire. When something happened in their childhood and he left, he pretty much ran away because he was going to end up in the foster system. He ended up meeting this man who was able to turn him into a vampire through like scientific means. So this has more of like a scientific vampirism background to it than like a paranormal vampiric thing to it. Anyway, he has developed this way of turning people into vampires in a much less painless way than what he was. And he provides them with like this training sequence of how to become the best vampire and how to feed and what to avoid and things like that. It's like Vampires Anonymous, if you will. And she is very, very enraptured by this. She wants to potentially become a vampire with him because, you know, it seems like a great deal. And in this world, lots of people are vampires, so it's not like the super hidden secret where they have to hide their identity because they have transformed like police officers and nurses and school teachers into vampires. So in this world, it's not that big of a deal to become a vampire. However, there are vampires who sort of go feral, and Jay has to take care of them. And one of these feral vampires wants to go back to the original ways of vampires being like the predators. And so there's this like turf war going on in the background of this story. Meanwhile, Daisy and Jay are rekindling their romance, and they get spicy with it. I liked this book. It wasn't anything super spectacular. It wasn't anything mind-blowing. I liked that it gave me those nostalgic Twilight vibes. I very much felt like this was modern day Bella and Edward with less angst, okay? And that is something that appealed to me because Twilight has always been an angsty story. And so to see this world where these two characters, you know, don't really have secrets from one another, and he's so willing to turn her into a vampire and she's willing to become a vampire, it's a lot less angsty. I liked the whole childhood friends to lovers aspect. That's one of my favorite tropes, so I'm never not gonna like that. I liked that this was just a quick, easy read. There wasn't anything too difficult about it. The world building isn't anything deep or anything like that. It's a pretty modern day story. However, it also is a bit of a forgettable story. Like, I will not remember this book by the end of the year, I'm sure. I thought the characters were pretty one-dimensional. There wasn't a lot of depth to them, despite them having a backstory. They were pretty surface-level characters. So this was fine. It just wasn't wow. Hello, editing me popping in to say that I'm about to rant about the second book in this series. The first book was How Does It Feel? I've already talked about this. I loved this book, okay? But this book ends on a kind of a cliffhanger, but it has a very fantastic ending, like an ending I couldn't have predicted ever. And I don't want to spoil the way that ends for anybody in case you're curious about reading it. However, I am going to talk about the ending of this book when I rant about book 2 coming up soon. So I just wanted to put that out there because if you want to read this series and you don't want to be spoiled for the ending of this book and or anything that happens in the second book, just skip on past until you see the next book image pop up. There's your warning. Okay, thanks. Next book that I'm going to talk about is one that I technically DNF'd, but I read the majority of this book, so I'm claiming it as a book that I read. I DNF'd this book at 86%, and that is What Did You Do? This is the sequel to How Does It Feel, which is a new adult fantasy romance about fae, very much enemies to lovers. The first book is about this girl named Callie who stumbles into this fairy circle of mushrooms and she gets dropped down into the Unseelie court where the Unseelie prince is trying to kill her. And at the beginning of this second book, she thinks that she has killed him. And it turns out that she was actually sent and trained for all of her life to kill the Unseelie prince. However, she ended up bonded to him. And she has these like residual powers because she thinks he's dead, but she still has these powers and she's like, oh, it must just be his energy still in me or whatever, because she doesn't know that he's still alive. And she had to kill this guy in order to take her place in the Seelie court because she made a deal with the Seelie queen when she was a younger girl. She would do this in order to become Seelie royalty. So this second book starts off with a bang and it picks up where that really great ending of book 1 left off. And I was like in shock because I was not expecting that story to go that course. And it did. So I was really invested and really fascinated with this story. I thought it was such a unique concept. I was here for the very toxic, villainous love story between Callie and Mendex, who is the Unseelie prince, because he is a very sinister guy. He's not morally gray. He's more morally black. Like the guy tries to kill her, even though he's like, oh, I don't care if she wants to be with me. She's bonded to me, so she's gonna be with me. She's mine. Nobody else is going to touch her. That's how unhinged this guy is, and I was here for it. I was in love with it. I was invested in it. And then I was reading along, and it got to a point, there was a scene in this book that I didn't particularly love because it featured a character that I had not met in the first book. And in the second book, it almost seems like he and Callie are going to have this romance instead of her and Mendex. And I didn't quite feel the romantic connection between them because like I was still getting to know this character, and I knew that Callie was bonded to Mendex, and I knew that there was something dark in Callie that only Mendex could see and only Mendex could appreciate. So this other romance, I didn't quite feel it on her end, and there became this smut scene where it felt very rapey to me because Mendex is controlling both this guy and Callie, and he's like, show him how powerful you are, take your power, whatnot. So she doesn't really want to do this. This other guy doesn't have any control over it. Like, he's obviously attracted to Callie, but he doesn't want what is happening to happen. So it felt very rapey for me, and I did not love it. But I was like, okay, well, you know, I'm going to go on with the story because I still like where the story is going. I'm hoping for Mendex and Callie to solve their issues or whatnot. And I didn't feel this love triangle, why choose thing happening until I did. Until I freaking did, okay? And it was about 86% of this book where I reached my limit of bullshittery with this book. Because I had invested all of my time, energy, and feelings into Mendex and Callie's relationship. And when I read, I become the main character. So I am Callie. So I'm invested in this romance with Mendex, right? And then this book does something so fucking cliche And I knew as the reader, I'm like, this isn't happening. This is just a lark, you know? And so I'm like, come on, Callie, you gotta realize this isn't true or whatnot. But she doesn't. And so as soon as this thing happens, she suddenly is like, oh, now I'm interested in this guy. I might as well end up with this guy. I'm okay with being with this guy. And I lost my shit. I was like, no, I am not doing this love triangle bullshit. Because that is not what I signed up for in this book. I hate love triangles. I hate them, okay? They are way too fucking angsty for me. They feel very wishy-washy. And I always feel like the female main character is dragging a character along that she knows she's not going to end up with. And so when it reached that point where I was like, oh my God, this is turning into a fucking love triangle. I just know it. Plus, I knew that the thing that had happened didn't really happen. So I'm like, ugh. And then I'm like, okay, but she's still bonded to Mendex, but she's also bonded somewhat to this other character. So now I'm like, okay, this is going to become a why choose scenario, isn't it? And I don't like why choose. I don't. Because I am a person who likes to freaking choose. I don't need that. I don't need multiple people. I don't need to switch people around. I am a one-person person. So when I inhabit the mind and body and feelings of a character, I hate it when they switch their mind and they suddenly decide, oh, maybe I'm in love with this person, but wait, I'm still in love with this person. So, oh, I'm just going to have them both. I hate it. It's so much drama. It's so much angst, and I cannot freaking deal with it. I DNF'd this freaking book at 86% because I got so flippin' annoyed. Because I loved the first book. You will see me rave about it in a vlog. Maybe it's already out. I don't know. But you will see me rave about that one. And I was so invested in this series. I was like, this is a really unique fae fantasy romance. I was looking up character art. I was looking up if there were special editions of the series. I was excited for the third book to come out next year. And it just pissed me off that it took this route. And even if it doesn't, let's say even if it doesn't happen, even if it doesn't go this why choose route that I have a feeling it might, let's say I'm wrong and it just ends up being a love triangle and she ends up going back to the guy who I originally thought she was going to be with, I'm still annoyed because you didn't have to do that to begin with. So yeah, I DNF'd this stupid thing with only like 14% left to go in it. And I won't continue on with this series because now I'm pissed off. And then moving on to the last book that I finished. It is Drums of Autumn by Diana Gabaldon. I am rereading this with Jenn at the Book Refuge. But this is the fourth book in the Outlander saga following Jamie and Claire. Claire travels back in time to the 1800s, Scotland, I think, where she ends up falling in love with Highlander Jamie, and their family saga progresses throughout the books. And in this one, they are in America. They are back together. And they're just trying to set up a life for themselves in America until their daughter, who is in like 1960 something, I believe, finds out some information about their deaths. And so she ends up going back in time to try and warn them about that. So this one I enjoyed. I really liked this one. And to be honest, this is a book that I remembered very little from the first time I read it. This was a reread for me, but it has been so many years since I originally read this that I only vividly recalled a couple of scenes within this book, and the rest, it was like reading it for the first time. But I enjoyed this one because even though there are some dangerous things that befall Jamie and Claire, for the majority of this book, they're really not in as much danger as they have been in the past books. It wasn't as life-threatening, and it wasn't as like, oh my God, are they going to survive this, as previous books, which I really enjoyed. I also just liked seeing them spend more time as a couple, rediscover their love for each other. I loved seeing Brianna go back and finally meet with her dad, and him and her building the relationship that they had. There were side character connections that we are introduced to. Some of those side characters I absolutely loved. So this was another book in this series that I rated really highly, and upon reread, I could say that it probably is one of my favorites of this series. I'm gonna pop back in here again too because my dumbass forgot a book that I read. I finished reading The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. This was actually my June Black Hat Book Coven pick that I didn't get around to reading in June because my library hold didn't come in. So I just finished it early in July. And this is a cozy fantasy with just a little bit of like a romance subplot to it. I wouldn't actually call it a fantasy romance by any means, but we are following Marigold, who is a honey witch, but she doesn't know that she's a honey witch. Her mother is a witch and she's sort of like shielded her from that, but she gets the opportunity to go live with her grandmother on this island and learn how to become a honey witch to take over for her grandma. So she goes to this island, she's learning all these things, and then these people show up who are best friends, and one of them is Lottie, who doesn't believe magic is real at all. And so Marigold takes it upon herself to do whatever she can to prove to Lottie that magic is real. And in doing so, they form a relationship. So this was okay. It wasn't anything spectacular for me. I did like the magic involved because I personally love honey. I put honey in a lot of stuff in my life. I love honey. So I loved seeing the honey magic and the different things that Marigold was able to do with it and the different like spells and potions she was able to make. I really also liked how the honey witches and the ash witches were described and the different things they could do. I liked the island setting. I thought it was described very beautiful. I also really liked the grandmother and granddaughter relationship in here. I thought that's a relationship dynamic you don't see a lot in books, is grandparent-grandchild relationships. So that was really great to see as well. However, I didn't feel any chemistry between Marigold and Lottie, and this is supposed to be a lesbian romance, and I just didn't think they had any chemistry at all. And I know some people don't like Lottie. That was one of the things in our book club. Laura and Jackie absolutely love Lottie. Kristin did not. And I was just sort of meh about her. Like, I didn't hate her. I didn't love her. She was just there. She had some bantery moments that were quite funny, but I didn't feel the attraction between them at all. I also wasn't a big fan of the witch who is cursed to never fall in love trope. I feel like that's a very overused trope, especially within witchy books. Like, why? What is the point of this? What is the point of saying witches can never fall in love? Because they always end up doing it anyway. So, like, what's the point? We need a new trope in witchy books because I just didn't care for that. And this book just overall, it was forgettable for me. So, it was fine, but moving on. So, that was my weekly wrap-up of the few books that I've read so far in July. So let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books or what your thoughts are. But if you haven't and would like to let me know that you made it to the end of this video, could you leave me a autumn leaf for Drums of Autumn, I guess? And with that, thank you so much for watching, and until my next video, good luck on your next weekly reads. Bye!